Whether you're drawing or writing characters, we've talked in the past about how if you want a character to be likable, it's a good idea to make them flawed, to give them flaws. Usually a pristine, perfect character repels us. It has the opposite effect of what we would hope. Okay, cool, good. Make them flawed, give them flaws, seems simple enough. Is a robot arm a flaw, though? Is a disadvantage a flaw? Let's take a closer look. One of the most interesting things that happens when you mention to people that a character needs flaws is that they automatically assume that they now need to be bad, evil characters, or edgy anti-heroes, but that isn't actually the case. All of us, as humans, are imperfect, and we make mistakes. And some things are just by accident, but others are predictable repeat offenses or patterns. Now, when a character has a personality flaw, it's not only believable, it's a relatable thing that we understand, it's also a tool for telling their story. For example, if a character has an insecurity and then comes up against something that presses that button of theirs, we probably know how they'll react, and likely it will be a mistake on their part. Some flaws that aren't really flaws are things like physical limitations, tragic elements of their past, or bad circumstances. Think about it, someone having a limb missing may be an impairment from a certain standpoint, just like losing a family member, being separated from the people that they care about, or being wrongfully imprisoned. But all of those things are external. A character with no flaws might handle these situations perfectly. They could be at peace with their missing limb, be grateful that they're alive, make the best of things, and there's no conflict. These flaws aren't really flaws. But they're close. They're just missing one ingredient: conflict. Going back to those personality flaws that we talked about before, some things are so deeply ingrained in our characters that they likely won't change. Other things could possibly change over the course of a story, which we would call an arc. Losing a family member isn't a flaw, but there is a conflict present in the grief and mourning that a character goes through. Maybe they don't handle it perfectly. Big Hero 6 is a film that's primary conflict is the idea of grief or loss, of being able to let go versus holding on. Now, the color of someone's skin certainly isn't a flaw, but an insecurity related to the color of their skin, perhaps through treatment that they've internalized throughout their life, could make them react harshly when they perceive something to be a racial slight against them. Now, a story can be as simple as a character wants something, and we can complicate it by involving multiple characters who want similar or different things. But we could say that in a different way and phrase it as a character lacks something. Now, an insecurity is typically something that we lack that causes conflict, so if a villain's flaw is their greed, that means that they lack money or power. But the thing with that lack is that it won't go away no matter how much that they acquire. In order to cure them of that greed, there needs to be something else or something deeper that gets resolved. Now, oftentimes the character lacks the humility or the strength to ever actually change their ways. If you're having trouble figuring out what sort of thing would make a believable flaw for your character, think about what good things they have going for them, good qualities or advantages that they have, and take that thing further, obscure or distort it a little bit. Take a character's confidence and turn it into blind overconfidence. Now, as an example of this, Sonic the Hedgehog has had plenty of iterations, some versions that I would say fit the idea of being too perfect, kind of pandering to an audience that just wants this super cool character, and he's often portrayed as being very confident. Now, these iterations tend to repel me personally, but then you'll have times where this confidence actually registers as overconfidence. It gets him into trouble. Him going fast becomes going too fast, and suddenly you have that complication or conflict that makes an otherwise perfect character more relatable. Now, again, we might start to focus the idea of flaws on bad things, selfish traits, or insecurities. However, remember that there are other ways that we can make mistakes, other ways to make a story more interesting by not being solvable or finished easily. Again, we might start to focus on the idea of flaws being bad things, selfish traits, or insecurities. However, remember that there are other ways that we can make mistakes, other ways to make a story more interesting by not being solvable or finished easily. Flaws don't have to be malicious or have ill intent. For example, naivete or being naive makes for a great flaw. It allows characters to trust others too easily. It allows them to think that they're in the right when they aren't. Now, this applies to characters like babies. A baby doesn't really have any ideas of harming others necessarily, but because they're so inexperienced and defenseless, it's like an ingredient for good conflict and story. Naivete can apply to characters like Yoda, someone who we think of as wise and pure good in the setting of Star Wars, but has some big mistakes behind him that you could chalk up to being naive or even too arrogant to see where he and the rest of the Jedi have made mistakes in the past. Now, the primary time that we know him, or at least we're first introduced to him, is after this arc in his life, but that doesn't mean you couldn't go back and add this sort of thing earlier in a character's life. Be careful too that you aren't making fun of your character through a trait you've given them. All too easily, sometimes you'll see a heavyset character be the butt of the joke simply because of their size. Now, all this does is make it look like the storyteller is poking fun at them. So have you ever heard a little kid start out telling a story that they made up? Sometimes there's a lot of good setup. Like, for example, there once was an alligator with a jetpack, and he had 500 children. One day he needed to drive to the store, and he did. The end. So not only are there a lot of extra elements in that story that ultimately have no impact on the actual story, the story itself of him driving to the store had no conflict, nothing interesting along the way, and no change or resolution of any value. Now, more than that, the alligator has no perceivable flaw, insecurity, or internal thing that makes them relatable, likable, or in need of change as a person. Now, as you tell stories with characters, use flaws to your advantage. Make them the spices that influence and deepen your character, instead of simply an element that's tacked on as an afterthought. Think of it along the lines of earning. What will your character do to earn their outcome, not cheat for it? And what will you do to earn your audience's attention and care for the character, not cheating it? Now, before you go, this week I'm offering a free downloadable wallpaper for your computer or phone screen, and all I ask of you in return is if you'll help me out by answering a few quick questions about this channel, the content that I make, and things like that. Head to the first link in the description, shouldn't take more than a minute, helps us out, helps you out with future stuff. The second Biko's backpack is also shipping out this week. Make sure you're on board on patreon.com/bageldenizen to get all of these here items. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating.